when Michael Brown was shot and killed in Ferguson in 2014, Brittany Packnett went to the streets of Ferguson in protest of racism and police violence. Later that year, President Barack Obama invited her to join his task force on 21st century policing. Since then, you've gone on to co-found Campaign Zero, a nonprofit organization focused on combating police brutality. So thank you so much for being here. It's really awesome to have you.
No, thanks for having me. That was also the most perfectly practiced intro I've ever had.
What? I didn't practice at all, I swear.
Quality. I really appreciate it.
Nope, just came up with it. But so, all right, so we're in the era of Trump, the man in the Oval, and it seems to have sparked this new era of resistance and activism. I'm wondering how, in your mind, how has that affected activism as it relates to police violence?
It's so interesting because Jordan Edwards was killed about 2 weeks ago while he was leaving a party with his brothers. They were in the car and the police officer shot at a moving vehicle, which is something that New York City police had outlawed decades ago, that we at Campaign Zero and at the President's Task Force, President Obama's task force, had been advocating to end as a practice for a long time. And so we see history repeating itself. And there was this moment online suddenly when people saw this story coming out where they were surprised, right? It was almost as if we forgot that police violence was still an issue simply because everybody's issue is an issue now.
Right.
So obviously we need to be paying very close attention to issues of immigration, to LGBTQ rights, to so many things, because all of us are under threat right now. From some folks' president. If you listen to Pod Save the People, you know I don't really call him mine. Yeah. But at the end of the day, police violence is not a new problem. It didn't start in 2014. When we think about the history of policing in this particular country, it actually is traced all the way back to plantation policing. So black bodies were not ever kind of served and protected. We were always controlled for property, for the use of our labor. And we see that continue today. So that fight hasn't ended. We're continuing on that. But we also recognize that police violence, and I know that we've talked about this before, but police violence is the branch of a larger tree, right? And this tree that exists is rooted in systemic racism and oppression. It sprouts a lot of things. It sprouts the kind of immigration policy we're seeing in this particular administration. It sprouts unequal housing. It sprouts a lack of diversity in many industries. And so our mission is not just to break off one particular branch of police violence, it's to uproot the entire tree and to plant in its place something that bears fruit for all of us.
Right, and I definitely want to get to, you know, what it's going to take to uproot this entire tree, because I absolutely want that to happen. But still kind of focusing on this branch of police violence. Yeah. Already this year, 116 black people have been killed by the police, according to Mapping Police Violence, which is kind of a subset of Campaign Zero.
It is. We've put out a number of different digital platforms since the early days of Ferguson in 2014. Our first kind of venture was the Ferguson Protester newsletter. We realized that a lot of media outlets were actually not telling the truth about what was happening in our community. And so we decided to tell the truth ourselves. So we curated the right kind of articles. We pulled tweets, photos, Instagram, Snapchats, whatever we could put our hands on that was accurately telling what was happening on the streets of Ferguson. We pulled that together and had about 16,000 subscribers worldwide in just a couple of weeks. And so from there, created We the Protesters, which is kind of the umbrella organization. And under that imprint is Stay Woke, Campaign Zero, Mapping Police Violence, ourstates.org, which is our newest release, and the Resistance Manual.
Right, and so I'm wondering how do you reignite people around police violence while also, you know, enabling them to focus on all of the many issues that we're facing in our country?
Oh man, there was a pretty well-known civil rights leader who said to a number of us in the movement, "You're not going to have to continue it because the police will do that for you." And unfortunately, when we look at not only what happened to Jordan Edwards in Texas, but 24 hours later, not even 24 hours later, finding out that this Department of Justice was not going to bring any charges in the killing of Alton Sterling, when we find out that the way that the case went in the killing of Walter Scott, which again was on video, we saw the planting of evidence, and yet this officer was able to plead out. Right. All of those things happened within 48 hours. We didn't do any of those things. Those things were done to us, right? So our mission, our responsibility at that point is to make sure that people remain aware, to continue to tell the story, and then to give people action that they can take to follow up with that. So we send people to ourstates.org because you have to recognize that whomever you are electing for mayor, city council, that's who's hiring that particular police chief and setting those use of force policies. We're sending people to Campaign Zero so that they can push on the right policies at the state, local, and federal level. But unfortunately, when it comes to issues of oppression, those things continue on their own.
Right. So I know you're very active on Twitter. You have over... You're great on Twitter. I love how active you are.
I just really talk. People are like, oh, I read that tweet that you wrote the other. I was like, girl, I was just talking. Yeah. Thanks.
I love just how honest and vulnerable you are. And but so Twitter has been used to, spark a lot of social movements in the last several years. Could you talk a little bit about how you use Twitter for your social activism, and then also talk about maybe how it could be better or more effective for you?
So Twitter is such a fascinating space because you can have this global community and you can still have this place known as Black Twitter, where we can talk about the same thing and never have met each other, but instantly understand where we're coming from. That happened on Mother's Day, right? Somebody asked, if you love your mother, what are her top 3 albums? And people were giving out mama statements from, do you have any McDonald's money, to other things. And we all instantly knew what we were talking about. And so that kind of bond is something that we've relied on quite a bit on Twitter. Some of the most important relationships that I've developed in this movement have been digital, right? Like, we met each other on Twitter.
Yeah, I just DM'd you, hopefully you respond.
And so that has been a really important communication and connection strategy for us. But we often say that protest is really just the act of telling the truth out loud and in public. And with Twitter and other new media spaces, we don't have to wait on anybody or seek anybody's permission to tell the truth. So if CNN is reporting that people are looting the McDonald's once again, we can tweet out that actually people are breaking in there because peaceful protesters have been tear gassed again, and it's milk, not water, that helps you get tear gas out of your eyes. Right? So telling the truth, making sure that we remind folks of the humanity of the victims of police violence, that it's not just a hashtag, that it's not just a statistic, right? That this was a person who was loved and loved. Making sure that people are able to tell and continue those stories and lift up those names and speak that truth is something that we really use that platform for. But as you've alluded to, it comes with a lot of danger. I had to actually leave my hometown. I was loving living there back in St. Louis, but I had to leave because I have a whole restraining order against somebody that I went to school with who found me once again online. And so it's not just kind of the anonymous Twitter trolls that we have to deal with every day, which, to be clear, that is traumatic enough. But when we have to deal with actual attacks, people doing the kind of hacking that gets folks our addresses. Someone contacted me last night asking me if I had received a letter that was sent to their parents' home with all of our names on it. That just happened yesterday, right? So when I think about it, as activists, we so often choose to be uncomfortable, we choose to be unsafe, but it would be really great if our tech companies who want us to be able to spread that truth, who certainly benefit from us using that platform in that way, would ensure that we're protected, that we're safe.
Right, and so I know you met Jack Dorsey pretty recently, and I saw you guys in the photo together. Another
STLian, another St. Louis thing.
Yeah. So what was that conversation like?
So Jack is great. Like, the first thing out of his mouth was, what can we be doing better? And so the same thing that I just told you about privacy, I told him to his face. We also asked for an edit button, if I'm very clear. Which you probably would have asked for too, or maybe
who wants an edit button on Twitter?
I do, Yeah,
not many people, but Cheever does.
It's that moment when you get a tweet out and suddenly it starts moving really fast, and then you realize that you forgot the T on the, and you're like, I used to be a teacher, this is not gonna work. So we asked for an edit button, but most certainly we asked for privacy. But he was deeply interested kind of in the continued landscape of St. Louis, what's going on. We also talked quite a bit about diversity in the tech industry. I work in education full time, and we often talk about representation, diversity, but it's one thing to have diverse faces. It's another thing to make people feel included and to ensure that they have equitable access to multiple opportunities. And we know that often the first is happening, but not the latter too.
Right.
And so we talked about what that means, what it means to have a tech company where you can boast higher diversity numbers, but everyone is being hired at junior levels, right? Is that real diversity? It's certainly not real equity. And so he talked about a program where they're training some of the folks who've been coming in at more entry-level positions to be able to take on senior roles, to be able to do coding and things like that. So I was certainly really glad to see that. That's the kind of commitment that we need to see from tech. I mean, this is the world of innovation, right? When we started Campaign Zero, people kind of didn't believe us. We call it Campaign Zero because we believe we can live in a world where the police do not kill people. And folks would often look at us and say, well, the police will always kill somebody, right? There'll always be some wacko, there'll always be something that happens where the police will kill someone. But when we look at other developed nations, we know that it is perfectly possible to not have the police kill anybody. So we wanted to set an aspirational goal as possible. And a lot of folks just are not dreaming that big, but this is an industry of innovation. You all can dream that big. So the question is, what would it look like if everything that you did was devoted to a sense of equity? If you checked every single innovation against a racial equity test? If you looked at every hiring practice and said, we are going to be different than the rest of the world because you already are. And I'm hoping to see that from this industry.
Nice. And so, when you spoke to Jack, though, how did you feel? Did you feel that he was sincere in his desire to affect real change?
I totally felt he was sincere. When we were actually on the panel, it was a panel of Jack and 5 black women, so we were not going to let him off the hook whatsoever. And it wasn't just any black woman, right? It was like myself, Angela Rye, who we know tells it like it is every day on CNN. That's the homie. April Range, Jamila Lemieux, and Trier, who works at Twitter. And one of the things that Angela pushed him on was actually investing in black-owned banks, right? That it is one thing to say we believe in equity, Black Lives Matter, all of these kinds of things, but your money shows what you value, and so why don't you put your money in some of these black lives and black businesses and black industries that are trying to ensure that we can uplift our community. And he committed to that in front of a full room of young folks at the NSBE conference, so I'm very sure he'll follow up on it.
That's awesome. I'll be sure to keep tabs on him and make sure that happens.
We will too.
Awesome. So I want to talk a little bit about security and privacy, which we've touched on a bit, but specifically, so the FBI, for example, has surveilled your colleague DeRay McKesson.
Oh, they've surveilled all of us.
They've surveilled you as well. It has been. There have been activists whose homes have been visited, and let's be clear, that was not even under this administration. So we are all watching who's hired next very closely, because we haven't felt safe under the FBI for quite some time. When I had to file that restraining order, I had to ask myself if I wanted to open up a federal file, and by the time everything was done, the administration had changed, and so I didn't feel safe doing it. And so, local, state, and federal level law enforcement have been things that we've had to be very wary of. Definitely. Yeah. So how does that affect your decision to use one tool over the other, maybe like Twitter versus Signal, et cetera?
I mean, I think when it comes to planning things, there are more private tools that we like to ensure that we use, mostly because the protest, right, and direct action that has the element of surprise tends to be more effective. But our practices are always peaceful, right? Our practices are thoughtful, creative. We want to make sure that we're not unnecessarily hampered simply because we're black and we have the audacity to speak the truth and stand up for ourselves. Because we know that we are treated very differently than, say, I don't know, white supremacists with tiki torches in Charlottesville, Virginia, trying to protect a Confederate statue, right? So we know that we are under much more threat simply because of who we are, and not even because of what we do. And so we do have to be very careful, but there are other times when it is very necessary to have the largest platform possible. So when we're recording Pod Save the People, or when we're out there tweeting, or when we're pushing out the latest Campaign Zero reports, we need as many people as possible to put their eyes on that.
Right.
And at the end of the day, I come from a people whose ancestors did far more with far less. And so this is a sacrifice that all of us are willingly making. But again, it would be a helpful thing to know that we were a bit more secure while we were doing it.
Right. So do you use Signal?
I do.
Okay.
I do.
So in addition to Signal, what are some other tools that you use, kind of with
Girl, I don't know.
privacy?
Can you tell me? Like, can we have this conversation backstage?
Yeah, we can definitely, I can hook you up for sure. So you're an on-the-ground kind of activist, as well as, you're very active online, be that through Twitter or through your initiatives with Campaign Zero.
Yeah.
But social media has kind of, the phrase has emerged, like hashtag activism or whatnot, where you're kind of, all talk but no action. And so what makes a true activist? Is that an activist if you're, talking passionately about it on Twitter but not really showing up?
If protest is the act of telling the truth out loud and in public, there are lots of ways that you can take the spirit of protest with you everywhere, right? You can take the spirit of protest into a corporate boardroom. You can take the spirit of protest into a house of worship that is not LGBTQ friendly, right? You can take a spirit of worship, of protest rather, into online and offline spaces. And at the end of the day, we need every single tool that we have at our disposal to win this thing. Everybody has a role. And so I don't like I don't like the phrase hashtag activism, and I don't like to get after the people who only sent out the hashtag, because you helped the hashtag go viral, right?
Right.
You helped Ferguson be the most used hashtag in the first 10 years of the entire platform. So we needed people who couldn't necessarily get up off of their couch to do that. The other thing though is that, so I'll use the example of Black Women at Work.
Yeah.
After Maxine Waters was called choice names by Bill O'Reilly and April Ryan was told to control her body movements by Sean Spicer, which was like fascinating. I'm like, I need you to try to find facts and not worry about April Ryan.
Right.
But so after that happened, I was at work as a Black woman, and I was like, this is not new, right? And there is an opportunity we have to tell this story in a way such that people don't forget about what happened tomorrow, and B, will recognize when it's happening at the cubicle next to them.
Right.
And so we started with Black Women at Work, and I put my phone down, and then suddenly by the end of the day, it was the #1 trending topic. And from there, folks have been having not only different conversations, but taking different actions, getting that training, ensuring that they are creating equitable workspaces. And so, hashtag activism has gotten folks fired. Hashtag activism has gotten folks charged. Not enough folks charged, but it's gotten folks charged. Hashtag activism has helped change laws. We've seen 88 laws at least across the country, specifically around issues of police violence in the last 2 years. And 8 states have taken on at least 2 or 3 Campaign Zero issues in the legislation that they've passed. So I just don't believe that that's not worth anything.
Right.
I just don't think that we would be where we are if it were not for our online platforms. Definitely.
And we've touched on this a little bit, but when you advocate passionately for anything, there are bound to be critics, there are bound to be trolls. What's some of the criticism that you've faced? Maybe specific to Campaign Zero and your work there.
My favorite form of criticism is that whenever we call out racism, we are called racist.
Yep.
Right? That's always my favorite, right? And I'm like, if I tell you that it's raining outside, that doesn't mean that I made it rain. You need to recognize that the acknowledgement of privilege, of oppression, of suppression, of racism, of sexism, of xenophobia, of Islamophobia, just because calling it out makes you uncomfortable doesn't mean that it's wrong. In fact, I'm trying to make you uncomfortable, because if we don't get uncomfortable, we're actually not going to move out of this thing.
Right.
So that is always one of my favorite pieces of criticism. And I'm like, well, what would you have me do? Because if you are tired of hearing me talk about racism, I guarantee you I'm far more tired of living it.
Right.
And so at the end of the day, I would love for us to eradicate it so I don't have to talk about it anymore. I'd really love not to talk about it anymore. But we're not in that place.
Right.
So that is one of my favorite critiques that we get quite often. I think the other, because there are so many pathways in this work, and we've chosen around Campaign Zero, a policy platform in particular, folks will say that that's not enough, right? Or that you're not real enough, right? So we've got folks over here calling us racist and terrorists, and then we've got folks over here saying that we're not revolutionary enough. At the end of the day, I want to think about the most revolutionary, innovative solutions for community safety and uplift possible. I also know that people's lives have to be different tomorrow. So we have to be able to pursue long-term and short-term solutions both at the same time, because social change is never an either or, it's always a both and. And so I think that having this policy platform as a part of a larger, broadly connected network of activists around the country working on this issue is critically important.
Could you talk a little bit about the long-term strategy for Campaign Zero and maybe shed some light on some new projects you're working on, or what are some things that are coming up?
Well, the thing to remember about Campaign Zero is that we are not actually about hoarding power, we're actually about people power. So we created a user-friendly, clear platform that people can literally print out and take to their mayors, take to their state representatives, take to their congresspeople, and say, this is what I want you to implement. And how folks go about doing that, the tactics that they use, are completely up to them. But we wanted to resource people in a way that they could leverage the information for change in their own communities. And so we're all about empowering people, and that's what we want to continue to do. So most recently, we've released the Resistance Manual. One of the things I discovered very quickly, especially as I started to do some reading on things like fascism, right, and like countries like Germany, I never really thought I was an African American studies major. Who knew I'd be picking up those books?
Right.
But it was necessary to learn about those things. And one of the tactics here is to keep us disoriented, to be throwing so many things at us all at the same time that there is immigration news and LGBTQ news and news that affects people along racial lines and FBI stuff and investigations and all of this stuff coming at us at once. So the Resistance Manual is an opportunity for people to get educated, get organized, and take action. So it's basically a wiki where people are able to add additional information about multiple topics, and people can pick and choose the information that they want to receive, everything from healthcare to police violence and lots in between. So we released that about 2 months ago. And our most recent release is ourstates.org. Obviously, people are paying a lot of attention to what's happening at the federal level, but my phone just told me that the Supreme Court is having that conversation about North Carolina's voter ID laws, and that happened in the state legislature. So we want to make sure that people are equipped to pay attention to what's happening at the local and state level, know when elections are coming, know what positions candidates are taking, and are able also to connect with other people in their state who are concerned about the same issues.
Awesome. So it sounds like if people want to, get involved, become more active, they can check out the Resistance Manual, Our States, and all of that is available through the Campaign Zero platform.
It's ourstates.org, theresistancemanual.org, and the Campaign Zero website is joincampaignzero.org. I think that there are lots of ways in which we also leverage technology. We love Squarespace because all of our sites are built on it. We use Slack to manage virtual volunteers because really Campaign Zero, as of right now, is 3 people with a laptop in terms of the co-founders that are still working on it. But we've got incredible volunteers all around the country. A lot of activists use Teespring. I know we were talking about Pure Black backstage. I just released some new shirts today on my buildloveandpower.com platform. Because our protest signs we wear on our chests, right? And so, again, bringing that spirit of protest, not just in what we say and do, but also in what we wear, is another way that we're able to speak that truth and leverage platforms like Teespring and other things to be able to do that easily.
Right. Yeah. Awesome. Well, hopefully people feel inspired to take some action. So thanks for joining me.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.